Hello everyone. Today's video will be about the book burning event on the 10th of May 1933. For that I have brought an expert with me, Amos, right there, riding behind me. We're going to visit Micha Ullmann's memorial in Bebel platz, talk a little bit about the event itself, and of course about commemoration and remembrance culture. Amos, you're like me. You're a graduate of Humboldt University, right?
Yeah.
And you've been a guide for, is it what, 12, 13 years already?
Almost 13 years.
Almost 13 years. And tell me something. You're a graduate of the same university your grandfather went to. Is that correct?
Exactly. My grandfather also studied here, and he had to escape Nazi Germany in 1933, just a few weeks after the Nazis took power. So he left in 1933, and I studied at this university between 2005 and 2010. So I was able to complete my studies here, unlike my grandfather, who wasn't able to do it because he was a Jew in Nazi Germany.
Right, and tell me what was he studying? What was
he studied law.
What degree? Law.
He studied law.
Right, so we actually have the faculty of law of Humboldt University. So I suggest where your grandfather studied, right? So I suggest we cross the road and we'll go and have a look.
Okay.
We're actually on right on Unter den Linden, and the place that we're visiting right now is called Bebel platz, named after the politician August Bebel. But the event we are referring to today, when that took place, then the name of the square was actually Opera Square, named after this beautifully renewed opera building of the state. We're standing in front of the Juristische Fakultät, the Faculty of Law of Humboldt University, where Amos's grandfather studied. And you know, just a minute ago when we crossed the road, the square was completely empty, and now I just want to show you there are a few people around, bicycles actually, and Amos and I were just wondering if there are even tourists around, because they would have to go into quarantine for 2 weeks. I think it may be that they are foreign students or expats and people who suddenly now have the time to engage in a bit of tourism in the city where they live. Right, so the reason that Amos and I are here to shoot this video today has to do with this event on the 10th of May 1933. This was only maybe 2.5 months after Hitler was appointed Chancellor and the Nazis came to power. And on this day, the German Nazi Student Association, they took nearly 20,000 books and brought to this square. There's the Faculty of Law here behind, and the main university building, and the main state libraries around, and they piled about 20,000 books. And even though in the rest of the evening it rained a little bit, They burned books of many different types of people. Amos, do you want to maybe even to elaborate who are those people? Who are also those authors? What was was the main reason?
So the main reason was the Nazi ideologies, and that anything that is un-German, that it's not part of the German spirit of the German race, that doesn't reflect the German values, everything that is not according to those ideologies must be burned, must be destroyed. It is interesting, we have here an information sign, and you can see that the date is 1983, which means that we are now in the former East Berlin part, so we're in the former Soviet zone, and later East Berlin, East Germany. The capital of East Germany was East Berlin, as a matter of fact. And it's also the wording here. I find the wording interesting. We know today that also in Berlin, probably roughly 2/3 of the books that were burned were written by Jewish authors.
So who else? Who was the other third, if you more or less, if we quantify it like that?
Yes, the other third wrote about topics that would have been termed liberal,
un-German.
Un-German.
That's right.
They would have had socialist content. They would have had
communist,
humanist content. They would have had content that might be termed something that is even friendly to homosexuals or others. All
right.
those were actually not part of the German Nazi spirit, as a matter of fact. But here,
so what are the two? Because we can see at least two special words that we used to see quite a lot in East German commemoration.
Yes.
So what can you point?
Yeah, we here it says that everything that happened here should be a warning and to stay alert against imperialism and war. Yeah? Of course, we also have fascism. We don't have any wording, any note to the Jewish background here, for example. And during the GDR time, this would have been sometimes typical, as a matter of fact, that
in terms of how they told history,
and also in terms of their commemoration signs. We don't have here, it doesn't say Jews or
homosexuals
Jewish,
or anything that is not a little bit beyond socialism and communism.
Yes, imperialism could be also referred here to the United States in 1983.
Right.
Against imperialism at war.
From their perspective.
From their perspective.
That's right.
Yeah, East Germany, say West Germany are imperialists. So it's not something that, this was also, the wording is also part of this very interesting dynamic between East and West Germany. Yeah?
But let's go back a little bit to how the Nazis even defined, or what is German and what is un-German, and what was in their from their perspective, from the Nazi ideology. What was the principle that made them say, okay, those books should be eliminated, those books should be burned? Because they wanted to do something with society, right?
Yes, they wanted to do something with society. The wording in German is Gleichschaltung. The wording in some museums...
How would you translate that?
Yeah, in some museums in Berlin, they translate it into coordination. I find the translation a bit problematic.
That's right.
It sounds very neutral in my mind. I would call it Nazification. Yeah, I would call it Nazification of society, Nazification of the country.
But try to, because for me, I think maybe if I look at the literal breakdown of, because it's a bit of a compound word, right? In German, what we often do is we take two words and we put a kind of connecting S in the middle, and then it gets a bit of a different meaning. So so I think what's leading here is the fact that they wanted to bring everything together, right? To make everything the same.
Yes.
Is that correct in from what you understand?
Yes. They wanted to bring everyone closer together under the
according to
the Nazi principles.
Right.
Yeah. So coordination. Yeah, it is a coordination according to the Nazi ideology, the Nazi principles, the race ideology
that they have invented. Actually, just recently, if you think about it.
Yeah, and that was part of it. That was a very important part of the Nazi ideology, of the Nazi policy. So I would say so early. in the Nazis to start already with the Nazi book burning. It was already a preparation of the Nazis.
So when you say preparation, because it's also something that is interesting for me. They didn't, we talk about the book burning event itself. Amos and I have spent I don't know how many hundreds of times with guests here in the square, like any one of our colleagues. But it's not like they knew exactly which author to burn right on the day. It actually started a little bit before, didn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it started. The Nazi student organizations knew about this. This attempt or this plan to burn books, and it took them, as a matter of fact, a few weeks to compile a list of all those un-German authors. So of course it happened on the 10th of May 1933, but it was not as spontaneous. I mean, of course, according to the Nazi propaganda, it was also a kind of a rage of the students of the German academia against the Jews and against the others.
So do you mean that this is how they wanted to display it, to portray it to the population?
Public, yeah, they wanted to portray it as a rage, as a kind of a rage.
So in fact, it wasn't, I think, just for the German population. In fact, we don't think of 1933 as a time of internet and media and such globalization, but already on the 10th of April, it was the Nazi German Association, and they already proclaimed that they wanted to compile the list because the Jews are besmearing the name of the German culture all over the world. So they already came up with the excuse of some kind of a future spontaneous rage that young students will just burn anything un-German. So it wasn't, they planned it, but
they planned it, and it was definitely orchestrated by Joseph Goebbels, by the Nazi propaganda ministry. So and as you said, many people think that here in Berlin, in the capital of Nazi Germany, the Third Reich, this was might have been actually the main place, but it was definitely not the only place. As you said, 34 university towns.
Yeah.
So it was definitely not only a Berlin thing. Nazi book burnings happened actually across Germany, across university towns all over Germany. So this was definitely something that was well planned and orchestrated by
so the coordination. This is what you're saying, is that the fact that it was done all over the country actually shows that it was also coordinated and orchestrated in advance.
Yes.
Right.
This is what I claim, and I argue that this is also a very important day. I mean, I think on the 8th of May, in a few days, everyone will remember the end of the Second World War.
That's right. So the 8th of May on German time and
9th of May on Soviet time.
That's right.
So end of the war, 1945. Yeah, and in a couple of days, all the world is going to speak about the 75th year of the end of the Second World War. But we speak about how everything had happened. It didn't start with Auschwitz. It didn't start with the war.
But that's actually very interesting. So there's a process here, right? There are also kind of, maybe you can talk about a systematic approach to all of it, right? I mean, it started with book burning, most of it. And actually that's very interesting that you're saying that, because when I guide the tours, I often talk about actually the burning of the Quran and the Bible in Spain of the 1480s and 90s, but we also have examples from Germany before it became Germany. So we know that, for example, in 1817, I think in Thüringen, somewhere in the middle of Germany, there were student associations, and that was kind of the beginning of, I'm reluctant to say, but some kind of German nationalism or German feeling as an identity, not just kingdoms that speak some kind of a Germanic language. And exactly on the 300th anniversary of Martin Luther's 95 Thesis, there were groups in Thüringen who thought that those books are not German, they are un-German. So already back then, someone thought of this idea of destroying culture by burning books that they considered un-German. Yeah. So we have precedent to this kind of...
We have another precedent where we say the Nazis didn't invent
this kind of method of ruining cultures.
Yes, and the Nazis didn't invent many stuff, and this is one
Right.
of them. Yeah, and this is one of the things.
This is one of the things that they did invent, but made worse, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean the Nazis, I think, in many cases didn't invent things, but they brought it to a whole new level.
Right.
So as you
Right.
say about German nationalism, this is maybe one.
Even anti-Semitism.
Anti-Semitism, and this is one of the reasons that the Nazis were able to be so successful, because there were already resentments, and there was already this kind of cultural thing in Germany of German, nationalism. This was something that was, as you said, during the Napoleonic Wars, during the 1870 wars, definitely after the defeat of Germany, after the First World War. So this is something that the Nazis definitely capitalized on and were able to use to their benefit in a very, very effective way.
So let's move a little bit also from that to maybe if you can give me a few names of authors that may be familiar. If anyone is watching this, I think the easiest would be that you're familiar with names like Albert Einstein or Ernest Hemingway. Actually, Helen Keller's books were burned here as well. But could you give us also maybe other names
we
that
can
you...
give you we can give you one example is books written by Heinrich Heine, who was a very prominent German Jewish author and poet, actually mostly poet.
So before we show the memorial, which is really one of the main reasons that people come to the square, talk to me a little bit about Heinrich Heine, and because this is something that he wrote in a screenplay in 1820. So
yes, so actually he wrote also plays, and he wrote a play called Al-Mansur, which speaks about the Inquisition, which speaks about a time in which not only Jews were persecuted in Spain, but also Muslims who came from North Africa. In this play that he wrote, he speaks about a scene in which Quran books are being burned by Catholic Christians
why?
in
What was the
Spain.
reason?
The reason was the Inquisition. The reason was that the Christians wanted to have the hegemony and to rule Spain during the 15th century.
So in fact they saw these different ideas, maybe new. They saw them as a threat
They saw them as a threat to Christian Spain.
to the hegemony of the church in that
in Spain.
Spain generally.
Spain generally. This is both the reasons why the Jews were persecuted and also the Muslims. So in his, it is very interesting because in his play he's actually mentioning Muslims as the victims here.
Why did he do that? It sounds on the face of it, it sounds a bit strange to do something like that.
Well, he lived also in a different time. I guess when Heinrich Heine lived during the beginning of the 1800s.
Right here in Berlin.
Right here in Berlin as well, and also in other cities in Germany.
That's right.
In Hamburg and from Düsseldorf in Western
Right.
Germany. We speak about a different time. We speak about a time in which we hardly had any Muslims living in Germany. We speak about a time that people didn't have so much prejudice.
Right, I think that's for me the reason to wonder. Right.
And this is why for maybe some people today it would have been, of course, an interesting angle to think why actually he wrote about Muslims. But I think there was this fascination, and there was also the idea of the Jews and Muslims in Spain between the 8th and the 11th century, actually sometimes combining forces against the Visigoths, against the Christian armies in Spain. So there was a time of cooperation between Jews and Muslims in Spain, and even today we have Jews and Muslims as minorities in Germany. So I think he saw that there were some definitely things in common.
Within the persecution, you mean?
In the persecution context, definitely.
Because for me there's also I think an element that Prussia, sometimes we refer to it as the Iron Kingdom, which really de facto it means that it was a kingdom, right? It was a dictatorship. It was not a free democracy like we have today. And possibly Heine saw his problems in the university right here. I think he moved from Hamburg a few years before that, if memory serves, and he did not want to talk about the discrimination in this kingdom that he was a citizen of by the government. So he kind of maybe wanted to talk about it via the stories, a sort of.
It's a very interesting point. Yeah, definitely, this could be the case. Yeah, so actually he wrote what he wrote, and little did he know, or some people say maybe he didn't
So actually say the sentence first. That's maybe.
Yeah, so the sentence. Maybe we should have a
we
look
can
at the
have a look at the sentence, although we remember it, don't we? I think we.
No, if you want to see the information.
Let's have a look at the information sign, but I can even tell you. Within the story, Heine wrote something like, das war ein Vorspiel nur, dort wo man Busche verbrennt, verbrennt man am Ende auch Menschen. So the quote itself, as I think it shows, it's right here, and what would be, and it is an underground room with some shelves enough for 20,000 books. I think from here you can see a little bit better. I hope the camera can show that. No, it's really quite difficult. So I'm going to stop the video and I'm going to bring some water, and we're going to pour some water on this plastic window and try to show you a little bit better. I've seen so many different translations. How would you best translate this sentence?
Yeah,
this was just the prelude or introduction
or pretext.
Yeah.
Prelude or pretext. There where books are being burnt, eventually also people will be burnt. But as you said, there are many different versions to this translation. But the idea is of course the important part here. So even if we don't have the nuances of the exact one-to-one translation, the idea is clear. He wrote it in 1820 as part of a play, and today in hindsight, of course, we come here and we say that in 2-3 days we're going to speak about the end of the Second World War and the end of basically liberating the Jews from the Holocaust, and 2/3 of those books were books of Jews. Most of the
Jewish authors were quite famous, I think, as German authors, right, or French or English as well, right?
Yeah, and of course,
Russian,
most of the German Jews,
of course,
most of the German Jews stayed here in 1933, 1934. Of course, they knew about the Nazi warning, but most of them, of course, didn't think what's going to come, didn't know what's going to come, and this is, of course, a very interesting kind of prophecy-like quote, and of course, we'll never know.
It's as if he, predicted the future 120 years before the Nazis eventually did burn people.
Yeah.
Really, if you talk about like Professor Friedlander talks about the peak of extermination during the Holocaust.
Yeah. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, also in the play, he's not only speaking about burning Quran books or Muslim, he also speaks about the Inquisitions. We know that also Jews were tortured. So he speaks about Muslims who were tortured.
Just before the deportation of the Spanish Jews and the Portuguese Jews, right?
So he also speaks, I think, in this play about torturing Muslims and maybe even burning Muslims alive. So he speaks about not only burning their books, he speaks about also burning them.
Okay.
And in this play.
Right.
So that's of course chilling, right? When you think about
Absolutely.
it. And this is of course, you can argue this is where it started. This is where it started. Nobody thought back then. I mean, some maybe.
Because of the problem that it's so hard to predict the future, and if something happens that is bad in society, you still can't know how worse it's gonna get, right? This is, I think, to me, that is something that is still an issue that we have today, that we see maybe in our countries, if we live in different countries, and we see a political situation that may seem quite bad in one moment, and maybe it gets worse in another moment, but in most cases in human history it never got that bad. So we don't really know if it's ever gonna get to such situation, right? So
and we can only hope, when standing here, of course, that this time, either here or every other country or society in the world, the respective society will be able to stop it before it's too late.
Right. So actually that leads us to talk about the main memorial that we have here in Bebel platz today. So the memorial was built here in 1994, designed by Israeli artist Micha Ullman. Okay, so let's I poured quite a lot of water and I hope it'll show. Otherwise we're gonna have to do a reshoot in the evening, but maybe you can see some empty shelves right here. And then let's go back to Amos. So you think, tell me, what do you think will be maybe different this year on the 10th of May?
Well,
different, let's say, compared to previous years.
Yeah, I don't know. I have the feeling, I mean, of course, we have still Corona time here in Germany.
So we can already see an empty square right now.
Empty square anyway. Usually, maybe we're going to be able to show it also during the video, how usually the squares looks like on the 10th of May.
Right. I will try to maybe put some pictures.
If we're going to find something, usually we have a lot of big pillows here and an open library that people can sit here and also read books, the same kind of books that were burned here on the 10th of May 1933.
So in fact, let's really explain this. So there's always a bit of a stage. You see the Hotel de Rome, and there's a stage with you know, I'm not going to mention, but certain political parties, and they do public reading from the books, from copies of the books that the Nazis didn't want us to read. So that already I find this to be a wonderful thing that they do for commemoration. But beyond that, like you said, they put chairs all over and comfy chairs and whatever, and again, because it's springtime and it may rain, so they also sometimes put I've seen this before on the 10th of May in all the years that I've been here. They put the copies inside bags, like transparent bags that you can get from the library, and you can, you know, if you read English or Russian or German, I think those were the common languages that the books that were burned were written in, and you can come here. And I don't know about you, this is for me something absolutely lovely, that you come here on the days before and during the 10th of May, and you see people reading the books that the Nazis didn't want us to read.
Yes, and I think also usually on the other side we have a small book market.
And on near the Humboldt University main library on Unter den Linden.
Exactly,
That's right.
and also in this market, all the year round, and also some of the books being sold there are also copies of books.
Intentionally, so someone...
Intentionally,
right.
Copies of books that were burned on the 10th of May 1933. I mean, this year, of course, regardless, the city is still a ghost town, like many cities across the world because of Corona, but I think that, you know...
There's another issue.
Another issue, the public awareness this year might be shifted. There is a big project here of a company called Kulturprojekt, and they're doing a lot of events now online instead of the offline real events that are cancelled for 75 years to the end of the Second World War, the defeat of the
So
Nazis.
It's kind of a special anniversary also in that sense.
It's a very special anniversary for this year, for the 8th and for the 9th of May, and maybe the 10th of May, the book burning maybe is going to be a bit forgotten this year. So
pushed to the historical, to the somehow pushed to the public
fringes.
Memory, exactly, fringes of the public memory.
Yeah, and this is why I think it's a good idea, Saf, that we're discussing it here, because as I said, I think this is where it all began. It began here with burning books. Nobody thought what it would lead to, and it ended with between 50 and 60 million dead during the Second World War, which ended 75 years ago, the day after tomorrow.
Right. So, and that reminds me, I really want to ask you one last question, but to me an important one, and I think you have a young child, so maybe very important to you as well. What about the future of commemorating such events? Because I don't know about you, I've been here with tourists before, and before I tell them what it is that I want to show them, it's not so easy to find. They don't see it so obvious, it doesn't stick out. And the other thing for me is that maybe it's a bit too abstract. I don't know. What do you think? The next generation, will that kind of a monument, memorial, will that be enough?
That's a very good discussion.
What do you mean, like in different levels, or?
I mean, for example, the Holocaust Memorial.
Right.
Maybe you're gonna
most
also,
famously.
Yeah. Is an abstract memorial, but in a way the opposite from this one, because the Holocaust Memorial is huge. You can't miss it.
And there are no or very few info signs.
So you find it.
Yeah.
And then of course, even if you look for information, it's maybe difficult on site to find information.
So on the one hand, it's very easy to find. In fact, you can't even miss it if you come to Berlin for the first time.
And it's very abstract.
On the other hand, it's very, very abstract.
And here,
yeah.
It's what I think you're getting to, and I think it's more problematic. It's both abstract, and it's also very difficult to find. So it's not only even if you find it, okay. Even if you find it, you have to try to decipher it to understand.
Right, and even if when there's sunshine, you don't necessarily see the memorial itself. So, what do you think? Do you think it should be, I don't know, bigger, or there should be more upright information signs? If I try to make you think a little bit a decade or two into the future.
Well, at
least.
It also depends if you're talking about international tourism in the city. Here
we want. I would argue that we want more people in the world to know the story.
Yeah. So of course here the signs that you were showing are in German. Right. I mean, if you
also a good point.
Okay, now of course today you have internet and you're going to Google it and you're going to find it. But I mean, if you don't speak German and you come here
without a tour guide,
right? Let's say you see it, of course, or without a tour book. So usually today, of course, these kind of abstract memorials are, I think, in a way today less problematic.
Why? Is that because
of smartphones, because of internet?
Right.
Because before that age, because some people before that had no smartphones and no guides and no textbook.
So both translation, let's say, and the story itself would be very immediately available.
Yeah, I think today it's more effective in the sense that still the chances of you coming here not understanding anything are today lower, because you either have a smartphone usually and you Google it, the location, and then you see it, and then maybe you get a word or two from there, and then you're gonna get maybe the context. I mean, I think you're not gonna have many people who come here and try to understand it and not understand what was the topic. And then if you try to find something about it, this is something which is, I think, this is exactly what these kind of artists wanted. I think they wanted people to engage themselves,
to think
and to try and understand it. It's the kind of a process to discover, and when you try to discover something, I think the approach says, in a way, it's gonna stick, it's gonna stay. It's not something that you're gonna read, just move on and say, okay, I've been here, but you're gonna need a few more minutes here to try and to think about it, to try and understand what it is all about. So I think it is. I have a more positive, I would say, stance about it today than I would have had when it was done in 1994.
Yeah.
People came here
or when we started guiding, or
when people came here at the end of the 1990s with no smartphones and maybe something no text.
Yeah, but I want to point something else about that, because one thing is, of course, like you say, technology and availability of information is constantly changing to the extent that this information will be available even more, right? From a guiding app, whatever, even if someone doesn't hire our services. But beyond that, my question that I find always quite interesting is when we look at memorials, is who are they for? And like you say, in the end of the 90s, there would have been only, I think, several hundreds of thousands of tourists coming. So perhaps a discussion for reunified Germany, how to remember the Holocaust, or how to talk about the Holocaust together as one country. So it was mainly for domestic tourists, maybe for Berliners, but also for domestic tourists. Whereas now, the answer to the question, who is this memorial for? Maybe it's now changing to something more international.
I think it is changing. You see it also in other memorials.
Also, right? Not instead of the Germans, but let's say additional.
Additional, yeah. I think we also see it in other memorials in Berlin, right? You see it on track 17. There is another area,
right?
At the memorial of
platform 17 in Grunewald. That's right.
Which was were deported from Berlin to the death camps, to ghettos in Eastern Europe. So also there you have, you know, a few memorials. Some of them are still from the 1980s, only in German.
Yeah, right.
And then you have a sign there on a kind of a traffic island from 2011, 2012, with a German text and an English text. So it took until the beginning.
So there is an evolution in commemoration that has two outcomes. First of all, who it is that we're showing the information to, right? So who's supposed to remember? But to me, there is also the issue of why remember? What's the point? Right? So if it was for the Germans at first, it was maybe to talk about it more, maybe to think how, is there a way? It's a much bigger discussion that we're not going to get into, but how to take collective responsibility if we should. But for the next generation, Germans or not, I think the issue is really to try to think, it may sound a bit dramatic, but how to be as societies, how to behave, and right? Is it an issue of tolerance or discrimination?
Yeah, I think this kind of memorials, even from the 1990s, only in German. I think it's only one of a few main pillars of education for democratic values.
Right.
Okay, so as you said, you have a new country, a new reunified country from the beginning of the 1990s, from 1990. Federal Republic of Germany, and they have part of...
Sorry, we're gonna have to stop because someone take a little break, reattach it in post-production. It's actually really funny that, like Amos was just saying, they're cleaning a completely clean square because there's no one around. It's there's a bit of ridiculous and a bit of surreal within this situation and within the discussion that we're having today. So this is probably the best angle to show, and look at that. Hello. That was a speedy thing, but I hope you will see this guy. I don't know him on a different YouTube channel, so that's going to be interesting. Is if you're a French speaker, I think that was French, wasn't it? Yeah. Anyway, Amos, you were talking about democracy and the maybe about values, right? Everywhere.
Yeah, I think education for democracy is something that you can't take for granted.
So it's a continuous process.
Germany didn't really have any big, legacy or tradition of democracy up until the 20th century.
So relatively, do you mean just okay? So if you're not versed in those stages of history, what Amos is talking about is that compared to England and to France, it took this kind of unification of German lands. It took some time before they really were able to experiment with democracy in the first time. I think in the Weimar Republic, and that many people would argue that was a failure eventually, because maybe, like you said, there was not enough debate, or a debate that we need to have today. Even.
Yeah, well, this is also, as you said, it's a different debate, but
right.
The Weimar Republic came just after the end of the First World War, and we had the mass inflation and the stock market, and
so maybe what I'm gathering from what you're saying is that there's an element that the timing was really, really bad, and the circumstances were terrible.
And then in 1990, of course, we had also, East Germany. So we had two generations at least of Germans also living and being born and who grew up at a country which was, again, not a democratic country. So from the 1990s onwards, it's a big...
So just to stop you here, I think the issue with people who were born in the DDR, born in East Germany, is that they had some knowledge of democracy, or maybe they got into it somehow in the 90s, but they were never really educated formally about that, and they never really had enough opportunities to have discussions and deliberations.
Yeah.
Like maybe I'm not saying that people in the West necessarily, or not just West Germany, Western society, but certainly in the East they were kind of thrown into it without a lot of debates or.
Yeah, so I think this is why when this memorial was set up in 1994, okay, so
right.
to speak,
early days.
In 1994, it was the year when the last Soviet forces left,
and the British as well.
The British as well, and left their respective zones.
Right.
So it was not that long after the end of the Cold War.
Right.
And then you have a new generation who grew up in the 1990s, who didn't know basically anything about democracy. And this is one of the pillars, commemoration of what happened here is part of democratic education, and of course education for tolerance or tolerant values. And I think this is when we see all the German text here with no English word from 1994. This is
maybe that could change. You're saying
this is changing as we spoke about the sign.
But even here, even specifically to this event and to this memorial space, let's say.
Yes. No, I think I mean by now we speak about we speak already about a country. 3 decades after reunification. I think today Germany is the strongest democracy in Europe. Of course, with a lot of challenges. Also now in Corona time, so you have a lot of challenges.
Yeah, which really brings me to maybe to bring us a little bit to conclusion. Oh, whoa! Nearly dropped the camera. Is that like you said, it's just to confirm if I understand you correctly, is that we really need to have this discussion as a continuous process, part of life. Maybe not the main focus of everything, but part of life. And perhaps also to make it accessible to all populations, so domestic tourists, but also to our international guests.
I would have found it better if I find it better if also here there will be some signs in English, for example, or international,
or Spanish.
Yeah. And this is something that I think would be okay, would be important. Having said that, as I said, in the internet age, I don't really believe that people who come here and stand here and want to understand what it is.
Yeah, they wouldn't miss. Yeah, right.
I mean, in a regular time.
Well, that's exactly. First of all, kind of to bring this video to conclusion. So first of all, to wish everyone safety and health, and that we'll all get beyond this Corona time healthy and good, right?
Yeah.
And sane also somehow. But that once we get over that we come and visit us, right? And if you come here, stop, have a look, take a little bit, take your time if you can, and kind of think about it, right? Ask critical questions.
For a conclusion, I think the most important part in this memorial is really to stop and think. This kind of tells us where it could start. In Nazi Germany, it didn't start.
But it can happen.
It can happen everywhere.
Right.
And it happens today, maybe to different extents, of course.
But book burning is still something that happens in the world.
It happens today in the world, also in some countries today.
Right.
And we should all stay alert.
Absolutely.
This GDR of West Germany, the sign says stay alert.
Yeah.
I agree with this sign.
It's fantastic, I think. What could be better, right? Yeah. To finish this video.
So I think this is the most important conclusion. I mean, we stand here that after tomorrow everyone will speak about the end of the Second World War, but if we try and recapitulate and think how it all started, we can definitely argue it started with this kind of book
can start like that.
It can start like that.
Yeah.
And we should all try as hard as we can to stop it while it is still in this phase. I'm not saying, this phase is horrendous, but if we are able to stop it with the destruction of culture before people are being destroyed and killed,
so
this is a huge task and a huge accomplishment.
Right. So we already have Heine's prediction, but like Amos just said, and I think that's a perfect way to end this video. We don't need to be so smart like Heine and to envision the future so far in advance. We already have some experience, so maybe to come here to think, to stop, and to ask the right questions, and maybe we can actually prevent such things like that. So I want to thank you that you know, if you watched the whole debate, I hope you found it interesting. It became a bit of a longer video, and I really am glad because we were able to go in depth into certain points of the debate. So thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, obviously, and of course, Amos, thank you so much for participating today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, it was lovely ride and lovely debate, so thank you, and yeah, see you in the next video.
Bye-bye.
Bye.